Hello, AP World students. Here is another lecture from me on topic 1.2 Dar al-Islam. Dar al-Islam means the world of Islam, basically. So it's a big topic and it's going to cover a lot of the Eastern Hemisphere, but you will see everything in these slides. So, little background. Islam is founded about 600 years before this course starts, so we're going to have to backtrack to where it begins. It does spread very quickly and very deliberately by adherents, meaning they want their religion to spread. That's not always the case with some religions. Some religions are very insular and don't want that. But another reason why it spreads is because the principles really appeal to people of many different cultures, and we'll get on to what those principles are later. It's the beginning of an important role as cultural and economic force in Eurasia at this time because a lot of governments at the time are not very powerful, except for, we talked about China was very powerful, but most of Eastern Hemisphere, the governments are weak and small, so religion can be a very connective force. So it starts in a desert region with groups of kinship groups called Bedouin people, tribes. Um, there's lots of fighting over land and water. There is one major city called Mecca where a lot of these tribes come together to trade. And because there are many different faiths in this region, they have a building called the Kaaba, which is a large black stone. And it had in there idols for many different faiths that people could come and worship when they stopped to trade. And it was a symbol of polytheism and animism. Animism, again, is kind of like Shintoism. It's belief in animal worship or giving spirits to inanimate objects. And polytheism is many gods. This is a map of what the pre-Islamic world looked like. So the area we are looking at right here, Mecca and Medina, there is not a major empire there. Almost the entire Arabian Peninsula is just made up of nomadic and merchants moving around there. And again, sometimes coming to these major cities. The major empires outside of it are the Byzantine Empire in Europe and North Africa, and the Sassanid Empire in Iran. So again, this is the Kaaba, and we'll talk later about why so many people go and visit the Kaaba during every year during what's called the Hajj. Unfortunately, during COVID, we have a lot less people traveling. So, uh, kind of biblical history of Islam, if you believe it or not. Is all of what's called the Abrahamic faiths are connected. The Abrahamic faiths are all the faiths that begin with Abraham. Abraham is the father of Judaism, and the story goes that he is told by God that he should create a new religion, and it's called Judaism. And then God also tells him that his son will take over for him as the king of the Jews. And so he and his wife are trying for years and years and years and years to have children, and they never can. And it comes time that his wife is around 80 years old, and he's like, I don't think it's going to happen. So he gets permission from his wife to have a child with his servant woman, because he says, "Hey, God told me I'm going to have a son, and that son's going to be in charge." And with the servant woman, he impregnates her, and they have a son named Ishmael. And then a miracle happens, and his 80-something-year-old wife also has a son named Isaac. And of course, his wife says, "Well, I don't want the servant girl's son to be in charge of Judaism when we are gone." So they banish Ishmael and his mother out of their town, and Isaac, even though he's the younger son, becomes the king of the Jews. So Judaism comes from that, and then of course Christianity comes from Judaism because Jesus was Jewish. So Christianity comes from Judaism, and then kind of going along with that, Islam has their own way of connecting themselves to Judaism and Christianity. So all three faiths are very similar. They all worship the exact same God, don't believe anybody when they say, oh no, Muslims don't believe in God, they believe in Allah. That's pretty silly because the word Allah just means God. They all celebrate similar practices, and they all have the same God. So how did it actually start? The way it actually started was that Muhammad went into the desert to pray, and for 40 days he was in the desert without water or food, as it goes, and he sees a vision, and he is visited by the angel Gabriel. Gabriel is in the Torah and the Bible of Judaism and Christianity. So the same angel Gabriel comes to him and says, "Hey, I'm a messenger from God. You are going to be a prophet of God." And he is, whatever Gabriel tells him becomes the foundation of the Islamic faith. Muhammad goes back to Mecca with all of the information that Gabriel gives him, and he gains a following in Mecca of people who believe him. However, the government of Mecca doesn't like it because part of the idea of Judaism, Christianity, and now Islam is there's only one God and every other God is wrong. So remember, we said Mecca was a place of many faiths. He comes back and starts telling them all of their other faiths are wrong and they're all going to hell. So the government kicks him and his followers out, and they run away to Medina, which is that city north of Mecca. And this is the first what's called hijra, or flight, which is a important part in the history of Islam and seen as the founding date of Islam in 622 CE. Muhammad does return to Mecca with an army because he says he holds a grudge and he decides to go back. He takes over the city with an army from Medina. He destroys all of the idols that were in the Kaaba, but leaves the Kaaba itself as a symbol of the one God. And he starts forming there the first Ummah, or Muslim community, and unites all of the Bedouin clans under Islam. So, what does he believe in and what is he trying to spread? He wrote down all of the things that Gabriel said in a book called the Quran. Sometimes you'll see it spelled with the QU, sometimes you'll see it spelled with the KO. It's all transliterated from a different language, that's why. And then you'll also see there's also another book called the Hadith, which is a collection of things that Muhammad said. So theoretically, the Quran is what God said, and the Hadith is what Muhammad said. Sharia law, which is like Islamic law, is basically combining the two things. They're all seen as laws that you should follow. The other part of it is that the seal of the prophets. There are multiple Jewish prophets. There are multiple Christian prophets. What Muhammad said is, God told me I'm the last prophet. Nobody else is coming. It's all perfect now. And if you want to think about it that way, think of Judaism as the first version of God's religion, and then Christians believe that Jesus came down and said, "Hey, we need to update Judaism, right? Judaism needs a new software update, and here's what it is." Jews disagreed and kept on following the old information, whereas people that liked the update started following Jesus and became Christians. And then again, Muhammad comes and says, God talked to me and said that Judaism and Christianity need another update, but this is the last update. It's 100% perfect now. So there's supposed to be no more prophets. Another difference is Christianity is the only religion that believes Jesus was God. Judaism and Islam both believe he was, Judaism believes he was just a guy who was saying things that were contrary to their beliefs. Uh, Muslims believe Jesus was a prophet, that God spoke to him, but he was not God. But the Muslims do believe in all of the Jewish and Christian prophets. Prophets are people that speak to God. Another part of the main ideas of Islam is their 5 pillars. These are like the most important things you need to do if you are a Muslim. You need to declare that you believe in one God. That's the confession or declaration of faith. You need to pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. You need to fast during the month of Ramadan, which is the same time that uh, Muhammad fasted. You need to give alms or help out the poor. You need to do what's called the Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca. At least, every year would be great, but at least once in your life that you should visit the Kaaba in Mecca and worship Allah there. And then there are other customs that people have adapted over time that are similar, in fact, to Judaism and Christianity sometimes, but that are not part of the main 5 pillars that you can see there. When Muhammad dies, there is a dispute over who should take over the faith after him. Some people believe that Ali, who is his son in law, he did not have a son of his own. He had a daughter, and Ali married his daughter. So, for all intents and purposes, that would be his heir. Some people thought he should be in charge. Others believed his wife's father, his father in law, should be in charge. It was also like his best friend. And it is Abu Bakr, his best friend, who becomes caliph, which is kind of a mix of king and pope. It's the religious and political leader of Islam. Abu Bakr is in charge. Ali is not. He continues, and along with the next few caliphs, to conquer territory outside of Mecca and Medina and Arabia and spread the faith. Uh, Eventually they're going to spread under another dynasty all the way to from in Northwest Africa into Spain and all the way east into the Indus River. Um, the Arab people are very passionate about the new faith and they want to spread it as much as possible. They spreading that faith is another what's known as jihad, a struggle to keep your religion going. Uh, However, all these fights about who should be in charge of the faith eventually lead to a major split in the religion that you definitely need to know about because it is still a political issue nowadays between the Shia and Sunni sects of Islam. Shia Muslims believe that the person in charge of Islam should be a direct descendant of Muhammad. Somebody that, so therefore, since he didn't have a son, somebody that is descended from his daughter, and so on and so forth. Sunni Muslims just believe it should be the most devout or pious Muslim, and sometimes that means that Muslims get to vote for their leader of the Sunni faith. If you know more about Christianity, I would say that Shia Muslims are a little bit closer to Catholicism, where there's one person and has a lot of power who's in charge, and Sunni Muslims are a little bit more like Protestant, where it's different places believe that different people should be in charge. It's not a perfect analogy, though. So when does that split actually happen? The first 3 caliphs after Muhammad are Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman. And then Ali does eventually become caliph after that. However, that makes the Shia Muslims happy, and Hassan also is there, makes them happy. But once they have the taste of having a descendant of Muhammad in charge, they don't want to go back, and there is a split when Muawiyah is chosen, and he is not a descendant of Muhammad, so they decide to choose their own caliph who is a descendant of Muhammad, and that is the first time where we have a major split in the 2 faiths, where they're not all united under one caliph. So that first election of Muawiyah leads to that split in 661. The Umayyad dynasty is led by Muawiyah, and they are Sunni Muslim. They have a capital of Damascus, which is modern day Syria. Very powerful, imperial. They spread very, very far, all the way to Spain, conquering almost all of Spain and Portugal, and all the way east to include parts of India. They are only stopped in Spain when they start to invade France, and a tribal leader named Charles Martel, which Martel means the hammer, so he's Charles the Hammer because he bashes people's heads in with a big gigantic warhammer. They are stopped at the Battle of Tours, which is it's in France. So they had the intention to keep on spreading Islam all throughout Europe. And if it wasn't for Charles Martel, who is going to be, if you've heard of Charlemagne, this is his grandfather. So they are stopped spreading Islam into France at that Battle of Tours. They run the government through a centralized bureaucracy similar to China that we talked about. They make money by taxes. They tax Muslims for that charity that they're supposed to do through the five pillars. And they also charge a tax on non-Muslims because they are not Muslim. There's a tax for not being a Muslim called the jizya. So Jews, Christians, and others have to pay that jizya tax. There is some intermarrying and conversion. However, if you convert, you're not considered a real Muslim at the time during the Umayyad dynasty, which is going to lead to some problems later on. People of the book, what they mean by that are people who worship the Torah or the Bible are treated better than others, and other people sometimes are often just killed for not being a person of the book, right? Meaning that they don't worship the one God. Excluding non-Arabs from the government is going to lead to some problems and chaos, and eventually there is a rebellion that is supported by all the non-Arab Muslims, and they rebel against the Umayyad dynasty government, and a new clan takes over called the Abbasids. So here's a map of how large the Umayyad dynasty gets. Even under those first four caliphs, so in about 20 years, they take over the entire Arabian Peninsula, all of the Middle East, Persia, and Egypt. And then under the Umayyad dynasty, they took over the rest of North Africa and all of Portugal and essentially all of Spain too. And then east over here to the Indus River, which is modern day Pakistan. Back then it was India. So very far spread. They are able to conquer a large territory, and mainly in the center is where most of the people are converted to Islam, but throughout the rest of the territory, a lot of other people are converted as well. So the Abbasid dynasty is a little bit smaller. It is led by descendants of Muhammad's uncles, so the Shiites aren't too bad with it. However, the big change here is they're going to open the religion to everyone. Anybody that wants to convert to Islam will be equal. And this is the first time where, and it does really follow, there are passages in the Quran that say that all Muslims should be equal. So this is the first time where the government is really reflecting that. And this helps establish Islam as a universalizing religion, meaning lots of people want to start converting because if they convert, they become equal with every other Muslim, which in a lot of parts of the world at the time, there's a lot of inequality. And if you can become equal to a king, right, because you are the same religion, that's pretty enticing. A lot of different cultures are mixed here, and it starts the golden age of Islam. Ulama is this group that is formed of Muslim scholars who help interpret the Quran and Hadith. Think of like them as the Supreme Court. The government is moved to Baghdad in modern day Iraq, and it's led under a vizier underneath the caliph, kind of like a prime minister. Military commanders have a lot of power, but again, it's not going to be as powerful as the Umayyads. One of the reasons why we consider this a golden age is because of the emphasis on education and intense study during the Abbasid dynasty. And because of that, they're going to have kind of unprecedented amounts of inventions and innovations during this time period. And a lot of different universities and libraries pop up throughout the whole empire. Some of the most famous are the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, and the university that is in Cordoba in Spain. So they're economically what's going on is they are based on agriculture, even though a lot of the territory is desert, but they are able to grow crops in some of the other territories. And that increased food supply is allowing their cities to grow. Cities are also government and religious centers. One of the big ones that College Board loves is these things called the Latin sail. The Latin sail is this triangle-shaped sail that allows them to trade far and wide along the Indian Ocean, the east coast of Africa, and in the Mediterranean as well. And the names of the ships they have are called dhows. Social distinctions in the Abbasid. Caliphs are very rich and have these lavish lifestyles. Merchants are growing very wealthy from trade. Mosques and other buildings are made, these beautiful mosques and buildings are made throughout the whole empire. They do have slaves, but it has to be, most of them are non-Muslim because the Quran says you can't have a Muslim slave. Um, the Arabic language is a unifying force throughout this, even though they're not all Arabic. In fact, a lot of the people in the Abbasid Caliphate are not Muslim. I'm sorry, not Arab, but they are all Muslim. And to be Muslim, you had to learn how to speak be Arabic because the Quran is written in Arabic, and they weren't translating the Quran back then into different languages. So if you wanted to be Muslim, you had to learn Arabic. Um, they are importing paper from China, which allows them to print or actually, well, write copies of the Quran, make books. They make poetry books. They also make books for all of the other technologies and sciences that we're going to get to as well. The name of their universities are madrasas. So you're going to see that pop up in the writing, in the reading as well. One of the other big things that especially Europeans and Western people are very happy about is that if it wasn't for Muslim scholars during this time period, the ancient Greek writings would probably have been lost. So Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Greek plays, all that stuff would have probably been lost if it wasn't for Muslim scholars who translated it into Arabic and other languages, and as well as Indian ancient writings are also preserved by Muslims. So they're doing a lot during this time period. As far as cultural things, the art forbade lifelike representations of humans. So a lot of art is calligraphy or geometric shapes. However, it's different. That's mostly Arabic Muslims who have that issue. Persian Muslims are fine showing people in their art, and they will even show Muhammad, which is very sacrilegious to some Muslims, but they will show him with a veil in front of his face. So if you see, this is one of those tips for AP World. If you see a picture of Muhammad and he has a white veil in front of his face, you know that this piece of art was made in Persia. We also, again, geometric figures are used a lot of time. Calligraphy, mosques have minarets. Minarets are the towers, so there's some very beautiful architecture made. As far as some of the innovations that are done during this time period, because they are so into math, they improve upon the Indian numerals. So these are the Indian numerals here, which is actually close. If anybody knows any Arabic numerals, they're pretty close to what Arabic numerals look like nowadays. But over time, in the Western Arabic tradition, those numerals become what we use. So nowadays, the number system that we use, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, those digits come from developments in Arabic numerals. They also help out with calculating large numbers. The word algebra is an Arabic word. So algebra was invented by Arab scholars, so blame them. They do lots of developments in optical sciences, meaning understanding the eyes, and also like telescopes and microscopes, those kind of things. Pharmacology, which is medicine, anatomy, the body, maps and geographical information, and astronomy. They do a lot of information about the size of the planet, the solar system, things like that, with astronomy and maps. Here's some actual primary sources. So again, this is their understanding of how the eye works. This is some algebra, and this is understanding about eclipses and the lunar eclipses, which they understood very well. The Abbasid dynasty eventually falls, partly because of fighting between Sunni and Shia, also because it's too big. There are some slave revolts and peasant uprisings. There's some bad caliphs. There's a lot of reasons that all lead to their weakening, and eventually, as we'll talk about in Unit 2, the Mongols eventually conquer the Abbasid Caliphate. But that does not stop Islam from spreading. It spreads even further into more tropical areas farther south. We're going to look at some of those regions, but a lot of it is because that's where merchants were traveling. So at first, Islam is spreading because of the leaders of the government conquering places and forcing people to convert. And then eventually it's going to start being people wanting to convert because they find the religion appealing. But then eventually, what's going to happen is after the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate, and you don't really have a government that's trying to force Islam on people, it spreads anyway because of trade. And that's what we're going to look at next. So it's a very blurry picture, but if you could think of the main part of Islam at first was here in the middle, but it is going to spread into Europe. It's going to spread into Central Asia across the Silk Road. You can tell that's the Silk Road there, down into Southeast Asia and India, and then a lot of it into Africa as well. If you want, you can watch this video, but I'm not going to watch it right now, but that will show you a little bit more about the spread of Islam. So, spread of Islam into Africa. Islam is going to provide a connection with West Africa or sub-Saharan Africa to the rest of the world through trade. There had been some centers of civilization there because of the Bantu migrations. Bantu were a group of people that lived in West Africa and were like the first big major civilization in Africa, and they migrated east and south all throughout most of sub-Saharan Africa and spread their culture there. Some of the very large empires in West Africa at this time are going to be Mali, Ghana, and then in next unit, we're going to talk more about Songhai. And then on the east coast of Africa is what's called the Swahili coast, because they all speak some version of Swahili. Swahili is a language that is passed down and related to Bantu. And then a lot of Africa does still continue to have stateless societies, smaller groups of people. So we have Western Africa here, and the main empires we're looking at are Ghana and Mali. Songhai will be in next unit. The introduction of Islam into West Africa is really going to bring West Africa into contact with the rest of the world very much more than it had been previously. And the reason is because of trade. You see up here is North Africa and Spain. That's where the Islamic empires are. And in between the Islamic empires and West Africa is the largest hot desert in the world, the Sahara. And these cities right here, Timbuktu and Gao and Jannah, are kind of on the edge of the Sahara Desert. And then underneath is less deserty regions. And they are going to be able to finally connect to North Africa and Europe because of the introduction of camels. Camels are not native to Africa. Camels are native to the Middle East, to Arabia, where Arabs are from and where Islam was created. So when Islam comes into North Africa, they bring camels with them. Those camels then allow people to, for the first time ever, cross regularly across the Sahara Desert. So they are crossing for trade purposes, and mainly those trade purposes are for gold. Gold coming from West Africa. There's a lot of gold back then in that region, and for salt and other goods up north. Many merchants are going to convert to Islam so that they can speak to the Arab merchants up on the northern part of the Sahara Desert. Eventually, Mali is going to be replaced with Songhai, but we'll talk more about that next unit. Ghana is going to fall apart first and be replaced by Mali, the Kingdom of Mali, which is founded by a king named Sundiata, which means the Lion King. That should sound pretty famous. He's a great, courageous king. However, the most famous king you've probably heard of is Mansa Musa, and that's who this picture is of. Mansa Musa is a very devout Muslim, and because of that, he needs to do some things as a Muslim, including the Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca. And he doesn't want to just do a nice, humble visit to Mecca. He wants to really do it out because he is considered by many historians to be, even accounting for inflation, one of the richest men in all of history because of the amount of gold that Mali had at the time. So he's going to take a huge retinue with him, camels, people, supplies, all with him on his Hajj to Mecca. And also, he wants to knock out another one of the five pillars, which is alms, which is giving to the poor. So he's going to do both of them at the same time. He takes so much gold with him in the form of gold coins, and every single city he goes to, he literally makes it rain with gold coins and throws it to all the people like a parade every single city he goes into. And every city that he goes to, he ruins their economies through inflation by giving all the poor people more gold than the city had beforehand. So because of that, he gives money to the poor, but also ruins a bunch of economies as he goes along the way, and eventually does make it to Mecca and goes back home. His capital city is Timbuktu, and it is known for as like the major center of trade at the time in West Africa, but also because of this building. This building was the Great Mosque in Timbuktu, which was a huge library and university. And also because Timbuktu is on the edge of the Sahara Desert, it's the first place that merchants come to after they've crossed the Sahara Desert. And so it's a great place for them to stay in like hotels and also to trade. In South, South and Southeast Asia, Islam spreads a little bit more violently. So we have the Gupta Empire is kind of similar to the Han Dynasty or the Roman Dynasty. It's an older classical empire. When it falls apart, India falls into fragmented and regional kingdoms. But the one thing that is really holding all of India together is its religion, which is Hinduism, and the caste system, which is a social hierarchy that goes along with the Hindu faith, where everybody is fit into a social caste, where they are not allowed to associate with people outside of that caste. They are not allowed to ever climb or leave their caste. They have to marry somebody from their caste, and they have to have a certain job that befits their caste. So it's very rigid, and especially for people in the lower castes, not very popular. So when Islam comes through force, mainly, there's a lot of people that run to join Islam because they can leave that lower social status and become equal with all other Muslims. However, it is different than in West Africa and the Swahili coast on on the coast of East Africa, that Islam comes there peacefully through trade, whereas here that's not how it originally comes in. So you have how it originally comes in through some Muslim Afghan warlords who invade India and try to spread Islam. They destroy a bunch of Hindu and Buddhist temples and make some Islamic mosques and shrines. They then eventually established the Delhi Sultanate. Obviously, it's centered in the city of Delhi, which is in northern India. And it's the first time that we have a Muslim empire in India. And it's not associated with Middle Eastern or Persian or African. It's its own thing. They are often, though, fighting with the Hindu princes and kings of the time. Southern India really doesn't get as affected by Islam at the time, except for in little pockets that are along the coast. And other empires are smaller and than the Delhi Sultanate. Indians in the Delhi Sultanate are allowed to keep their native religions of Buddhism and Hinduism or other faiths. But Muslim communities start to grow as the Delhi Sultanate grows in power. Merchants are the main people who are spreading the faith after that initial conquest, including groups of Muslim missionaries called Sufis. Sufis are a little bit less rigid and more welcoming group of Muslims. I sometimes call them like the the version of like hippie Muslims where they are more mystical and easygoing, and they try to get people to become Muslim in a very gentle way. Um, People that convert to Islam avoid having to pay that tax, so a lot of people convert for that reason as well. Here we have some Muslim princes adopting Hindu versions in the and having Hindu wives, etc. We'll talk more about that in a different unit. One last little comparison between Islam and Hinduism in South Asia, and then we'll be done. Islam believes at this point, didn't at first, but now it does believe in the equality of all Muslims, whereas Hinduism, a big major tenet of it is that people are not equal. Islam is everyone must be submissive to one God, whereas Hinduism has many gods, although there's some scholars that would argue that all the different polytheistic gods in Hinduism are really manifestations of one God, so there can be debate in that last one. The Muslim ulamas are going to warn against pollution of Islam by Hindu practices, so they really don't want Hinduism kind of mixing into Islam, although the Sufis are like, yeah, sure, why not? It's fine. Remember, they're pretty easygoing. Brahmins are going to, who are the head of the Hindus, are very opposed to Islam because they see them as doing things that are very antithetical to Hinduism, such as eating meat, whereas most Hindus are vegetarians and believe it's sacrilegious to eat animals. Islam is going to meet some stiff resistance in India from the Hindu elites, whereas in Africa, if you compare it to them, it's the elites that are ones that are converting to Islam, whereas the average people in Africa are remaining non-Muslim, animistic, native West African religions. And Hindus, many believe their religion is superior to Islam, and because of that, there's going to be a lot of fighting and tension between Muslims and Hindus in India, whereas in Africa, Muslims and non-Muslims in West Africa often lived pretty peacefully next to each other. So that is all for Islam and the spread of Islam and the golden age of Islam. Hopefully you learned a lot from these slides.